picture this, it's a hot summer night back in 1993 in Manassas, Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
Most people sound asleep,
Right?
dreaming of cooler days, but not in one house.
Yeah.
No, in this one particular household, a nightmare's unfolding.
Ooh.
One that's going to become a global sensation. A young couple, seemingly ordinary on the outside.
Yeah.
But behind closed doors, their relationship is a powder keg. Tension, resentment, and abuse.
Yeah.
And tonight, that powder keg's going to explode.
Now, this case, it instantly became more than just a local news story.
Oh, yeah.
Almost like the world just couldn't look away from the sheer shock of it. Lorena Bobbitt, a young wife, severing her husband John's penis while he was asleep.
It's a story that had everything. I mean, you got the sex, the violence, and a big dose of just plain bizarre.
A hefty dose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a real-life soap opera with incredibly high stakes.
Right.
And that's what we're going to do today. We're diving deep into this whole Bobbitt case. We can try to peel back the layers, you know, all those tabloid headlines, the late-night jokes, and try to understand the people at the heart of it all.
Right.
Because before they became the Bobbitts, they were just John and Lorena.
Right.
Two individuals with their own stories, their own dreams.
Right.
And sadly, their own demons.
Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series.
Okay, so you got, a stack of articles about Lorena Bobbitt.
I do.
And we're ready to unpack this whole thing.
Let's do it.
Let's start by painting a picture of John and Lorena before that night.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't always, this infamous couple splashed across every newspaper.
Right.
They were once just two people.
Yeah.
Who, for a short while at least, thought they'd found love.
Right. So you've got John, former Marine. Some described him as charming, charismatic, but others saw a reckless, irresponsible side too.
And Lorena, an immigrant from Ecuador.
Right.
Working as a manicurist, hoping to build a better life in America.
Right.
Quiet, driven. She seemed like the total opposite of John.
Yeah.
But hey, opposites attract, right?
Right.
Or at least they thought they did.
Yeah.
They got married in 1989.
89.
But that honeymoon phase was short-lived.
Very.
Lorena would later allege that John's, that charming facade, that it crumbled, revealing a pattern of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual.
It's like their differences, the very things that might have drawn them together, became the cracks in their foundation.
Right.
And those cracks, they just kept getting wider.
This is where it gets really heavy.
Yeah.
And we need to, acknowledge the weight of these allegations.
Right.
Domestic abuse is a horrific reality for so many people.
Yeah.
And it's never okay.
Never.
But to understand this case, we have to consider how these alleged years of abuse might have shaped Lorena's state of mind.
Yeah.
Leading up to that night in June.
Absolutely. We're not condoning violence.
Of course not.
In any way.
No.
But we have to try to understand the psychological impact of just prolonged abuse.
Yeah.
Imagine living in a constant state of fear.
Right.
Walking on eggshells, never knowing when the next outburst is going to happen.
It's got to be terrifying.
Yeah.
It takes a toll.
It does. Victims of abuse can develop PTSD, experience anxiety, and even develop this sense of learned helplessness.
Right.
This is where they feel so trapped, so powerless, they start to believe that they can't escape the situation.
So, June 23rd, 1993, Lorena claims that John came home drunk and raped her.
Yeah.
This was, tragically, part of a pattern.
Right.
I know this is difficult to hear.
Yes.
But it's crucial context for what happens next.
And this is where we need to talk about that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
When you're faced with a threat, our bodies go into survival mode. Right. For some people, that means fighting back.
For others, it means fleeing.
Yeah.
But for someone in a situation of prolonged abuse, like Lorena claimed to be in, their fight or flight response might be constantly triggered, leading to a state of, hypervigilance and just this heightened sense of danger.
So in that heightened state of fear and desperation, Lorena did something shocking. She took a kitchen knife and severed John's penis while he was asleep.
Yeah.
Just saying that out loud is jarring.
Right.
But that is the reality of this case, and it's what propelled the story onto the global stage.
Yeah, and the aftermath of that act was just as chaotic.
Right.
And surreal.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the shocking nature of the event itself, But how the story got picked up by the media and just transformed into this spectacle.
The media went into a full-blown frenzy.
Full-blown.
It wasn't just news reports.
It was late-night talk show monologues, tabloid headlines, constant speculation.
The case just became fodder for jokes.
Right.
And sadly, Lorena was often reduced to this caricature, the angry wife, a woman scorned.
Right.
And her claims of abuse sometimes minimized or dismissed entirely.
And John.
Yeah.
What happened to him after,
Well, amazingly, John's penis was surgically reattached.
Really?
In this groundbreaking procedure.
Wow.
It was a medical marvel that for a while overshadowed even the sensationalism of the case.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to believe that something so horrific could have such a, unexpected medical outcome.
Right. It speaks to the advancements in medicine.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's almost overshadowed by the social and legal complexities that were about to unfold.
Because this wasn't just about one night, one act.
No.
There were two very real trials that came out of this chaos.
Right.
Each one shedding light on a different side of this twisted story.
Exactly. We have John's trial for marital sexual assault, where Lorena's allegations of abuse would be scrutinized under the legal system.
Right.
And then we have Lorena's trial for malicious wounding,
right,
where the question of her state of mind and the potential impact
Aye.
of years of alleged abuse would take center stage. So we've got these two trials happening, both unfolding amidst this media circus that's already painted a pretty skewed picture of the whole situation.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to separate fact from fiction at this point.
You're right. It's like the court of public opinion was already in session.
Right.
Before either of them even stepped foot in an actual courtroom.
And that's something that's really important to consider. I mean, how much did that media frenzy influence perceptions of the jury?
Right.
Of the public?
Yeah.
These were real people with real lives that were about to be dissected and judged under a microscope.
Okay, so let's break down these trials.
Okay.
Starting with John's trial for marital sexual assault.
Okay.
What were the key arguments?
Well, on one side, you had Lorena and her lawyers detailing this history of alleged abuse, painting this picture of John as a controlling and violent husband.
Right.
And they argued that, that the events of that night were the culmination of years of trauma, that Lorena was acting in self-defense.
Right.
Or maybe even as a result of a temporary break from reality brought on by the prolonged abuse.
And what was John's defense?
Well, his legal team, they focused on discrediting Lorena's claims of abuse.
Okay.
Portraying her as unstable, vengeful wife who acted out of jealousy or anger.
Right.
They tried to paint a picture of John as a victim himself, a man who had been wronged.
Yeah.
In the most unthinkable way.
So it sounds like a classic he said, she said.
Exactly. And those are always the toughest ones to resolve.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with something as deeply personal and emotionally charged as domestic abuse.
Right.
It often comes down to one person's word against another's.
Yeah.
Incredibly hard to prove without concrete evidence.
So what was the verdict in John's case?
Well, the jury ultimately acquitted John of marital sexual assault.
Wow.
They just weren't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Lorena's allegations were true.
That must have been a devastating blow for Lorena and her supporters.
Oh, for sure.
After everything she'd been through, to not have her claims validated in a court of law.
Right, and this outcome kind of speaks to this larger issue in these cases of domestic abuse, the difficulty of proving these types of crimes. It's often, like I said, a matter of one person's word against another's. Yeah. And without witnesses or physical evidence, it's incredibly challenging to get a conviction.
It's heartbreaking. It highlights how the legal system sometimes just struggles to adequately address these complex and sensitive cases.
And it brings up questions about how we as a society view and respond to allegations of abuse.
Right.
Are we quick to believe victims?
Yeah.
Or do we tend to doubt their stories?
Yeah.
Especially when the alleged abuser appears charming or successful on the surface.
Right.
Right.
That's a tough but important question.
Very much so.
So John's trial ends in acquittal.
Right.
What happens next?
Well, now it's Lorena's turn.
Okay.
To face the legal system.
Yeah.
Charged with malicious wounding.
Right.
And her trial just becomes this fascinating exploration of, psychology, trauma, and the legal definition of insanity.
Hold on. Insanity?
Yeah.
Are you saying that Lorena's defense was
Yeah.
that she was insane when she did this?
It's a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Her legal team argued that Lorena was suffering from temporary insanity.
Okay.
Meaning that at the time of the act, she was so overwhelmed by the trauma of the alleged abuse that she couldn't distinguish right from wrong or control her actions.
So essentially they were arguing that years of alleged abuse had pushed her to a breaking point, leading to a temporary mental breakdown.
Yeah.
That resulted in her actions that night.
Precisely. And they brought in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological effects of domestic abuse and how those effects could potentially manifest in extreme behavior. They argued that Lorena wasn't acting out of malice or revenge, but as a result of years of psychological torment.
That's a powerful argument.
Yeah.
But it also raises a lot of questions about accountability and how we as a society handle situations where mental health intersects with criminal behavior.
It absolutely does. And it's a debate that we still have.
Yeah.
I mean, where do we draw that line between personal responsibility and mitigating factors of mental illness or trauma?
Right.
How do we balance that need for justice with compassion and understanding?
That's complex.
Oh, very.
And I imagine the jury, in Lorena's case, had a very difficult decision to make.
For sure.
What was their verdict?
Well, after a lot of deliberation, the jury found Lorena not guilty by reason of insanity.
Wow.
They determined that while she did commit the act, she wasn't criminally responsible due to her mental state at the time.
That's a pretty landmark decision.
It was.
So what happened to Lorena after the trial?
Well, instead of prison time, she was ordered to undergo a 45-day psychiatric evaluation at a state hospital. But the story doesn't end there.
Of course not.
John and Lorena's lives took drastically different paths after this.
It sounds like we're about to enter a whole new chapter in this already convoluted saga.
You could say that. The trials might be over. But the consequences, the ripple effects of this case, they're just starting to spread. And they're going to continue to impact the lives of both John and Lorena and the public's perception of their story for years to come.
The trials are over. The verdicts are in. And both John and Lorena are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to fathom what must have been going through their minds at that point.
Right.
I mean, their story had become this global phenomenon, this cautionary tale splashed across, every newspaper, every tabloid. Where do you even go from there?
It's a question that speaks to the lasting impact of trauma, of notoriety, and of having your most personal and painful experiences just dissected under the public eye. I mean, for some, that kind of scrutiny can be crippling. But for others, it can be a catalyst for something unexpected, something powerful.
And it sounds like John and Lorena each took a very different path in the aftermath.
They did. John, it seems, kind of leaned into the notoriety.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he tried to capitalize on the infamy, appearing in adult films, granting interviews, almost embracing the caricature that the media created.
Wow.
It's curious, isn't it? This idea that even negative attention can be a form of currency in our culture.
It's almost like he was trying to reclaim the narrative.
Maybe.
Yeah, to spin this horrific event into something that could actually benefit him.
Perhaps. But the thing is, notoriety is fleeting. And for John, it didn't lead to any redemption or success. Instead, he continued to face legal troubles, arrests for theft, and allegations of violence against other women emerged.
It's a pattern that's
sadly
all too common in these cases of domestic abuse. This,
the cyclical
nature of violence.
Yeah, it can be so hard to break.
It's a reminder that fame, or infamy, I guess in this case, doesn't erase past behaviors. Or, magically transform someone into a better person.
Exactly. It's not a shield against accountability.
No.
And in John's case, it seemed to amplify some of the negative patterns that were already there.
So while John was caught in this downward spiral of notoriety and trouble, Lorena took a very different approach.
She did.
Yeah.
Lorena chose a path of healing and advocacy. She reclaimed her maiden name, Lorena Gallo. And rather than shying away from the spotlight, she used it to shed light on the issue. So intertwined with her own personal tragedy.
Right, domestic violence.
Exactly.
It's incredible what she did. She could have easily retreated, tried to bury this painful chapter. But she chose to speak out.
She did.
To use her platform to help others.
It's a testament to her resilience, to her strength, and her desire to make something positive come from something so horrific. Lorena founded the Lorena Gallo Foundation.
Oh, wow.
An organization dedicated to supporting survivors of domestic violence and raising awareness about this pervasive issue.
So she went from this, this tabloid fodder to a voice for change.
Exactly.
An advocate for victims who often feel silenced. It's powerful, this reminder that even from the darkest experiences, something good can emerge.
It can.
That we have the power to, transform our pain into purpose, to use our voices for change. And to support others who are struggling.
Absolutely.
And that brings us back to the bigger conversation about domestic violence. A conversation sparked by the Lorena Bobbitt case.
It forced society to confront some uncomfortable truth about, the prevalence of abuse, the challenges of proving it, and the need for better support for victims.
It's a conversation that continues to this day.
It does.
And it's one we need to keep having. Because while this case might be remembered for its, sensationalism, shock value, we can't lose sight of the real human tragedy.
The individual lives forever altered, the family's torn apart, and the ripple effects that continue to spread outward.
The Lorena Bobbitt case, it's a stark reminder of the complexity of human relationships, the impact of violence and trauma, and the long road to healing and justice.
It is.
This whole case, it's a twisted path, full of contradictions and nuances. We've got the shock of the act, the media frenzy, the two trials, and then the divergent paths John and Lorena took. It's a lot to process.
It is.
And it leaves us with more questions than answers.
And I think those lingering questions are what make this case so compelling. Even all these years later. It forces us to confront our own biases, to examine how we respond to allegations of abuse, and to consider how we can better support victims and work towards a future where these stories become less frequent, less sensationalized, and ultimately less necessary.
Well said. So after this deep dive into the Lorena Bobbitt case, we're left with a lot to think about. What are your final thoughts?
I think it's important to remember that behind the headlines, behind the shock value, there were real people who experienced immense pain. And while their story is unique, it reflects a larger issue that we need to address. Domestic violence is a problem that affects so many.
It does.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out for help. There are resources available. There is support. You don't have to go through this alone.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Lorena Bobbitt case. We hope this episode has given you a deeper understanding of this complex story, and that it sparks some important conversations about domestic violence, mental health, and the challenges of seeking justice.
And remember, if you're interested in more thought-provoking true crime stories, be sure to follow CrimePod Castle.
And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and bonus episodes. Subscribe now and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.